not on board with this. So, but again, it's something that they're thinking of doing. That's not the only way we can use evidence from a gun, not just the bullets. When gun is fired, remember, the gunpowder explodes. Two things, by the way. The primer reaction happens. That often is also gaseous, releases some gases. Also, when the gunpowder explodes in the bullet, it leaves a lot of gun smoke. Back in the day, they used the gunpowder was a lot more smoky than it is now. But anyway, you still leave a lot of smoke. Maybe not a lot of smoke, but you do leave a significant amount of smoke where there's, and this is what they call gunpowder residue, also is all over the place. So it's the gunpowder, it's the primer, and sometimes, again, you make an explosion right near a piece of lead or cartridges or whatever it might be, you're going to cause some of that lead to get very heated and end up in the smoke. So you can actually identify from the smoke whether there was lead or was part of a bullet in there. So you have traces of the metal. Lead, usually, Pb is lead. You'll see that, you can see that in the periodic table. We're not looking at it now, maybe later, but that's lead. Bismuth is found in bullets, and Sb is antimony, also found in bullets and in these primers and whatever. So here's a chemical reaction of gunpowder. This is KNO3, that's potassium nitrate. It's also known as saltpeter. It's what helps the thing explode. You need a fuel, that's the carbon and the sulfur. And the result are a bunch of these chemicals, these are gases, but you also produce this thing, nitrite and nitrate. This is NO2 minus, that's nitrite. NO3 minus, that's nitrate. These come from blowing up gunpowder. And this is found in the smoke, and as you can see, it's all over the guy's hand. So it's not just in his hands, also in front and behind the gun. So if you're firing the gun near a wall, you'll get this gunpowder and these nitrites and nitrates all over the wall. And if you're firing from near the ground, you'll again see it from the gunpowder residue. You see the pattern from the ground. So the target can sometimes get it also, depending how close your gun was. The surrounding area of the target sometimes, or the surrounding area of the gun, as I mentioned, the wall or the floor even, if the person's lying down, and especially the hand that fires the weapon. That's really very important, because we find a suspect, we say, hey, let's check your hand. You got any of this nitrate, got any of this trace lead, bismuth, or antimony in your hand? I mean, people don't handle lead, bismuth, and antimony usually. It's found in a gunpowder. So why would you have that on your hand? Unless you fired a gun. So from this, we can, from the gunpowder, we can understand the distance that was fired. For example, let's say we can test fire something. We'll see how the gunpowder, the beginning, here it's like pretty much a bullet like hits, and gunpowder doesn't spread out that much, but it spreads out over here. So a distance of, let's say, 2 feet, 3 feet, whatever it might be. Might have a lot of residue or over there as it continues the gun, but again, it's smoke. It doesn't go that far based on the bullet that blasts out. So it'll pretty much end at, let's say, 3 feet or so. So here you can see no gunpowder. You might see shells, pellets from shotgun shells, but you might not see a bullet or the gunpowder over here. And again, the spread of gunpowder can tell how far away it was. So from this, you can tell the location of the gun from the gunpowder. You can tell the location of the gunfire, and identification of the shooter. Sometimes, if the gunpowder is found on their hands, this, by the way, is being contested, and people are not so sure about it, because gunpowder can be found on people who handle fireworks. So maybe the person handled fireworks, so you don't know if it's from the gun or from the fireworks. It also gets transferred when they shake hands. So, again, how do you know he did it? Maybe he shook hands with somebody who did it. It's also true that if you throw him in a police car, other people who handled guns and had all kinds of gunpowder on them might have left their residue all over the seats. So he might have wiped that when he was in the police car. So you got to make sure that this has not been done. So, yes, you can learn a lot from it, but be careful. Be careful with the crime scene. Be careful with the suspects. So, again, as mentioned, again, this causes a lot over here. And again, notice it's all over here. His non-firing gun hand would not have this gunpowder. Also, too far back, it wouldn't have the gunpowder. And these have got to be compared. Okay, so if the weapon and the bullet are not known, you can estimate things like scorch marks or melting of fibers around the wound. That might tell you a certain kind of a gun would lead to that. If there's no residue, maybe you can tell that the gun was more than 3 feet away, because usually there's no residue at that point. But this really depends on the weapon and the type of gunpowder. So sometimes if you know where the residue was, you know how far away it was, you can say, oh, it must have been this kind of weapon which doesn't spread the gunpowder that much, or this kind of a bullet that doesn't spread it that much, or something like that. You can tell certain things. You might have recalled from the video of the first lecture here, where the world's greatest detective, he was thinking, who fired this gun? It was either fired closer by a midget or far away by someone who was lying on the ground. And he realized it must have been fired by someone lying on the ground farther away, not by the midget, because of the gunpowder residue that was all over the floor. Now, the midget that was carrying it, let's say, 3 feet high or 4 feet high, you would not find a concentrated gunpowder there. But if a person was lying on the ground, in this case he was being pulled, but he was lying on the ground or close to the ground, the gunpowder residue would appear on the ground in a more concentrated way, in a way it's easier to tell. So the world's greatest detective actually figured out it was not the midget, it was the other guy. Anyway, the real way to tell how far away it was, how far away the gun was to the victim, is identify the weapon and the ammunition, and test fire it in a laboratory and see how the gunpowder residue spreads. And with this we know, oh yeah, if it spreads the same way from 2 feet away, well, there you go. The guy was 2 feet away. And you can also tell, by the way, then whether it was a suicide or not. If it was more than 3 feet away, it's maybe a person had really long arms or something, but whatever, you can certainly tell whether sometimes, very often you can tell whether it was a suicide. If there's no trace of gunpowder at all, it's very likely that it was someone, let's say, 4 or 5, 10 feet away, and could not have been, at least not a normal suicide. Or it could be done in self-defense. Now, here's an interesting case of George Zimmerman versus Trayvon Martin. The case was where there was a gated community, exclusive gated community, and George Zimmerman was, I think he was a volunteer. He volunteered to patrol at least a part of it, and he came across someone called Trayvon Martin, who he realized quickly enough did not belong in this gated community. And he demanded, Trayvon Martin leave or something like that. Exactly what he demanded, I don't know, but he confronted Trayvon Martin, and Trayvon Martin was not leaving all that quickly. George Zimmerman, demanded that Trayvon Martin leave, and they got into it. And again, this is a story from George Zimmerman. Ultimately, he shot Trayvon Martin, so we don't have much of a story from him. But George Zimmerman, being pretty much the only witness, he said that at that point he fought with, hand to hand with Trayvon Martin, and while they were fighting, he was getting hit on the head, so he pulled out his gun and shot Trayvon Martin. Now,